Hello and welcome to NTD Canada News. I'm your host, Gary Bai. People who oppose vaccine mandates or what they call tyrannical measures and government overreach gather in various locations across Canada on Monday. Conservative incumbent Kenny Chiu, who was trying to fight foreign government influence in Canada during the last parliament, has become a target of a pro-CCP force in Vancouver in its efforts to have him defeated in this election. We spoke to Gloria Fung, president of Canada-Hong Kong Link and a strong advocate for freedom and human rights in Canada, Hong Kong, and in China. She talked about how the CCP's infiltration strategies and how its influence in the political sphere in Canada has evolved over time. As we covered in yesterday's broadcast, Jody Wilson Raybold's book, India in the Cabinet, Speaking Truth to Power, went on sale today. She was Canada's first Indigenous Minister of Justice and Attorney General in Justin Trudeau's cabinet until she resigned amid a political scandal. A deep silence invaded Queen's Park on Monday as Toronto first responders gathered in a silent protest against the COVID-19 vaccine mandates. Without further ado, let's get to it. On Monday, just a week before Canadians go to the polls on September 20th, we seem to have reached a trash talk phase of this election campaign, with main party leaders throwing insults at each other. Liberal leader Justin Trudeau was in Vancouver on September 13th. He criticized Conservative leader Erin O'Toole on the promise to change Canada's greenhouse gas emission targets, on the less strict gun control approaches, and on his attitude towards mandatory vaccination for travel. Conservative leader Erin O'Toole was in Carp, Ontario, and Ottawa. During his announcement in Carp, O'Toole criticized Trudeau as without leadership and of self-interest for his calling this unnecessary and expensive election during the pandemic. O'Toole also criticized Trudeau for his role in the SNC-Lavalin affair and for his dealing with Indigenous issues. NDP leader Jack Singh was in Sioux Lookout, Ontario, and Neskantaga First Nation. He blamed Trudeau for broken promises since the Liberals took office in 2015. Jack Singh said the people are eventually paying the prices for those broken promises. Bloc Québécois leader Yves-François Blanchet was in Gaspé and Grand Vallée, Quebec. Blanchet is calling on the leaders to stop the personal attacks. Green Party leader Anne Paul was in Prince Edward Island. It is rare for her to travel outside Toronto. People's Party leader Maxime Bernier campaigned in 3 places in Alberta. Conservative incumbent Kenny Chiu, who was trying to fight foreign government influence in Canada during the last parliament, has become a target of a pro-CCP force in Vancouver in its efforts to have him defeated in this election. Chiu introduced his private member Bill C-282 in the House of Commons on April 13th. The legislation would mandate people who act on behalf of foreign governments, including the Chinese Communist regime, to register as foreign agents. Chiu is also the vice chair of the International Human Rights Committee in the House of Commons and has been vocal in criticizing the regime's human rights abuses. Chiu's position stands out and is daring, considering he himself is ethnic Chinese from Hong Kong.
Well, I'm somebody who would like to safeguard and secure our country. And definitely election is something that we need to safeguard and protect from foreign interference.
Chiu was sanctioned by the Chinese Communist Party earlier this year. Now, he said he is on the receiving end of a highly coordinated misinformation campaign.
I can tell you that the misinformation, the deliberate misleading from my opponents have been exceptional this time. It is unfortunate that so much disinformation and accusation, false accusation that is actually being circulated, and it's multidimensional. It's not just on WeChat, but it's also on WhatsApp and also radio. I was surprised by commentators, and it's disheartening because it demonstrates not just the breadth of how many sources are now sending out, but it's also tells me that how deep the disinformation campaign has been. But the attacks definitely does give me the impression that it's coordinated. The timing is just working so perfectly.
The misinformation campaign seems to be running through CCP-influenced Chinese media and posts on Chinese social media WeChat. For example, the Vancouver-based pro-CCP Chinese language radio AM 1320 and Canada Commerce Today both falsely accused Chiu's proposed legislation as harming and suppressing the Chinese community. Both AM 1320 and Canada Commerce Today toes the CCP line and serves as the voice of the communist regime. Canada Commerce Today has been authorized by People's Daily, the mouthpiece of the CCP, to carry its content since 2016. Radio AM 1320 would refuse advertisements for events in memory of those who died during the Tiananmen Square on June 4, 1989. The purpose of Chiu's bill is to ensure elected officials are required to report situations where they are approached by agents acting on behalf of a foreign regime for the purpose of influencing Canadian government policy. However, pro-CCP Chinese media and posts on WeChat targeting Chiu twisted the intent of the bill, telling Chinese that the bill will have harmful repercussions for Canada's Chinese community. Quote, "This bill is going to have extremely negative consequences for immigrants from mainland China. It will also harm economic, cultural, and technological exchanges between Canada and China," reads a WeChat post. Considering the soured relationship between Canada and China and Chiu's anti-China background, undoubtedly this bill is targeting mainland Chinese associations and aimed to control or monitor mainland Chinese speech and behavior. Chiu said these are false accusations.
I do have volunteers who want to stay quiet, and they know how this game works because they came from that kind of background. So they wanted to come and defend me in WeChat, but they decided not to because some of them has family ties still in China, and we know that with the high tech tight control regime that we are facing, they would be able to tie somebody who posted a comment to a specific address of their relatives, and therefore these people would be harassed and worse, would be in trouble. So my supporters would therefore prefer to remain silent.
According to a Nanos poll with 1,029 randomly selected Canadians, 88% of respondents support or somewhat support establishing a Foreign Agent Registration Act. We spoke to Gloria Fung, president of Canada-Hong Kong Link and a strong advocate for freedom and human rights in Canada, Hong Kong, and in China. She talked about the CCP's infiltration strategies and how its influence in the political sphere in Canada has evolved over time.
Well, I think the Chinese Communist Party has long been trying to promote their own handpicked candidates that will follow their instruction in promoting the Chinese interests on Canadian soil. And I have witnessed actually the supporting, the direct financial support, as well as sending paid volunteers to help their preferred candidates.
But promoting candidates that side with it isn't the only goal of the CCP, according to Gloria. She said the communist regime has obtained media assets in Canada and has been using them to paint those who are critical of the regime in a bad light.
And at the same time, they have also issued a lot of promotion articles in magazines, newspapers, as well as social media platforms that are under the control. And to the contrary, for those candidates that are very vocal and critical towards the Chinese policies, particularly the violation of human rights in Xinjiang, which our parliament has already passed a motion saying that, recognizing that this is genocide. But then I think to the contrary, they try to denounce MPs and candidates that support this position.
Gloria added that this influence campaign is targeting current candidates of the 2021 federal election. These are not incidental attacks, she said, but are a coordinated scheme to further the interests of the CCP.
So it's very contradictory to our Canadian positions, and they do not have the concept of safeguarding our Canadian value and interests and sovereignty in mind. In in some riding, I have also seen a very well orchestrated social media campaign to smear and slander candidates that are vocal, such as Kenny Chiu and also Jenny Kwan in BC. There's also Garnet Genius in Edmonton. All three of them have been very vocal in the past few years in denouncing the human rights violation of China. There are also some other constant strategy by which the Chinese Communist Party exerts its influence in Canadian politics throughout the entire term. Say, for instance, the offer of free trips to China to current MPs and senators, and then also to benefit them, to providing benefit to individuals for supporting the China's agenda, or in the form of very lucrative financial aids through their United Front organizations to Canadian community projects that will help build up their influence in local community. Now, after receiving these gifts, they tend to downplay or deny China's genocide on Muslim Uyghurs and crackdown on Hong Kong. Former Ontario MPP Michael Chan is a typical example, a politician whom CSIS alleges to have close ties with the Chinese government. Conservative Senator Victor O has also made a great number of free trips to China as well. So we wonder, what he has been, which best interest is Senator Victor O serving?
She suggests that Canada should start taking action to curb the aggressive influence campaign by the CCP, and that the next government should implement the Foreign Agent Registration Act. This would require Canadians, especially public servants, to disclose their status should it involve working with a foreign state.
Our government needs to set up a comprehensive foreign influence scheme and public commission to combat foreign influence. And our future government also needs to pass the Foreign Agent Registration Act, requiring the registration of all individuals, organizations that work for a foreign state or corporation or government, and this act will enhance the transparency of our important policy making process. We also need to provide core funding to ethnic community organizations that are most vulnerable to foreign influence. And last but not least, we also need to work very closely with like-minded democratic allies to structure a comprehensive strategy in combating foreign influence.
As we covered in yesterday's broadcast, Jody Wilson Raybould's book, Indian in the Cabinet, Speaking Truth to Power, went on sale today. She was Canada's first Indigenous Minister of Justice and Attorney General in Justin Trudeau's cabinet until she resigned. The Globe and Mail reported that Ms. Wilson Raybold is calling on the Liberal government to remove the hurdles to a long-standing RCMP inquiry into possible obstruction of justice. She was disappointed that the RCMP was not able to complete its investigation into the SNC-Lavalin affair because the government has denied them access to cabinet documents and key witnesses. It is important for the RCMP to do their job, she said in an interview with the Globe. The Ethics Commissioner was also unable to interview a number of witnesses, so I don't know if the RCMP are still undertaking a review. But I think it is important to have the ability to do a fulsome investigation. In her memoirs, she said cabinet ministers were discouraged from speaking to one another. Top Trudeau aides interfered in policymaking, and ministers were advised not to put anything on paper and conduct sensitive policy conversations over the telephone. Unelected staffers tried to tell me what to do, or not allowing ministers to be in the room together without a PMO staffer presence, she said, noting that they wouldn't even let senior cabinet ministers have access to the Prime Minister, according to the Globe. Conservative leader Erin O'Toole was asked at a campaign stop in Vancouver on Sunday whether he could lift cabinet confidences if his party forms the government so the Mounties could properly investigate the SNC-Lavalin matter. The answer is yes, he said. One of the very disappointing things with Mr. Trudeau is that there has been special access for friends and people close to the Prime Minister and those around him. You should not be able to use your influence to lobby your way out of criminal prosecution. People who oppose vaccine mandates or what they call tyrannical measures and government overreach gather in various locations across Canada at 2 p.m. on Monday. Out of those who attended the rallies, many were frontline healthcare workers who hope to share their vision of freedom of choice in the face of pressure from federal and provincial government to implement vaccination mandates across the country. Bradley Boucher reporting from Toronto.
Dozens of rallies against vaccine mandates are taking place across Canada. An event organizer in Toronto said she's been fired from a few of her jobs after speaking openly about COVID-19 vaccines.
We've been at City Hall and all these other buildings for the last 18 months and we're not being heard. And now we're here because we want to support also
The co-founder of Frontline Nurses of Canada goes on to say that some media outlets are misrepresenting her narratives.
It's been a misunderstanding. The media has turned our story around. We are absolutely not against these nurses.
With a wide variety of concerned people attending the event, a physician was fearful of being identified with the possibility of losing her job, like others in her profession already have.
I am completely against vaccine mandates. I think they are a coercive measure to get people vaccinated. This is against our freedoms. This is against anyone's medical decision. It should be nobody's business to have anyone inquire about their medical status and about what vaccine they took.
A gentleman stopped to share with us what happened when he went to see his doctor to get a medical exemption.
And the doctor mentioned that the College of Medicine and Surgeon of Ontario gave a protocol not to give any medical exemption until you take the first jab.
But not everyone is in favor of the protest, commented a doctoral candidate in RNA biology at the University of Toronto.
I don't think this hospital row is a place to protest against the vaccine mandates. This is a place of healing, and it is a very sacred kind of location for a lot of people.
A hospital worker on her lunch break shared some wisdom, pointing out people's choice to see others' perspective rather than further choosing to divide.
Because I used to be a journalist, and as a journalist you have to look at both sides of a story. And from what I see, I feel like everybody has their right to freedom of speech. And right now the scary thing is that people are becoming very polarized and they're not listening to each other.
Another rally against vaccine mandates will play out in Toronto on Thursday, September 16th. Bradley Boucher, NTD News Canada, Toronto.
According to a statement released by the Twitter account of the Toronto Police Operations at the end of the day, there were, quote, no reports of hospital staff or patients being obstructed, no reports of arrests or injuries, and all appears in order. A deep silence invaded Queen's Park on Monday as Toronto first responders gathered in a silent protest against the COVID-19 vaccine mandates. A group of more than 100 police officers, firefighters, and paramedics made clear their position by standing silently in formation on the front lawn of the Ontario Legislature for over an hour. Signs like Frontline for Freedom of Choice and First Responders for No Mandate could be seen at the feet of some of the participants. A small group of people showed up and stood in front to give their support. Mike Spadafora, a Toronto first responder at the protest, said in an interview with Global News that it was not about being against the vaccine, but that it was about protecting the rights and freedom of his brothers and sisters. The protest was one more among the demonstrations that took place in different parts of the country promoted by a national freedom movement. Vaccine mandates are creating splits among labor unions. After the Toronto Police Department announced mandatory COVID-19 vaccination requirements in August, the Toronto Police Association, the police officers' union, responded that it will oppose the mandate on behalf of its members, and that members should have a choice to get vaccinated or not, and it will continue to work with the department on the policy. A similar situation occurred with a union that represents public transit workers in Toronto and York region. The latest Nanos poll showed the Liberals at 33.2%, slightly ahead in the race. The Liberals have replaced the Tories and remain in the lead position after the debate. The other party's latest polls are Conservatives at 30.2%, NDP at 18.6%, Bloc Québécois at 6.8%, PPC at 6.6%, and Green at 3.8%. It is worth noting from Nano's poll that the People's Party of Canada continued to gain ground since Trudeau called the election on August 15th, causing discussions about whether the PPC could split the votes to the Conservative Party. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau had hoped to secure a majority in Parliament when he called the snap election, but the lackluster campaign and public anger over a vote during a pandemic are putting his chances of victory at risk. Trudeau decided to gamble an early vote and capitalize on his government's handling of the pandemic, which includes massive spending to support individuals and businesses and high vaccination rates. But with just a week to go until the September 20th election, Trudeau's Liberals are nowhere near the 38% in public support needed for a majority and could even lose to the Conservatives, led by the relatively unknown Erin O'Toole. Trudeau says he needs a new mandate to ensure Canadians approve of his plan of getting the country past the coronavirus pandemic. The Liberals, whose fiscal policy supports for the pandemic exceeded 23% of GDP, plans billions in new spending to support economic recovery if re-elected. In mid-August, when the election was called, the Liberals were well ahead of the Conservatives in opinion polls and seemed to be headed for an easy victory. That quickly changed, however, and the Liberals spent weeks trailing the Conservatives in the polls before edging back in the recent days. O'Toole and the other party leaders repeatedly condemned the vote call as a cynical power grab during a fourth wave of the pandemic, and those words appear to have resonated with Canadians drained by successive lockdowns. The Liberal campaign stumbled from the start, failing to provide a convincing reason for calling an early election and dogged by missteps like being flagged for manipulating a video of O'Toole talking about private health care on Twitter. During the campaign, every new Liberal promise, including billions of dollars for health care or a new plan to help people trying to buy their first home, has been met with questions about why the Liberal government did not do it during the 6 years in power. The re-emergence of ethics scandals has added to the campaign's woes. In 2019, he was censured for violating ethics rules by pressuring Wilson-Raybould in a corporate legal case before the previous election. With that said, thank you for watching NTD Canada News. If you like this video, please give us a like and share. It will help more people see our channel. We'll be back with more comprehensive election coverage, and we'll see you next time.